Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the programme where you can have all your property related questions answered by our team of experts. Joining us by Zoom we have Andy Wood, tax expert, barrister and founder of ETC Tax. In the studio we have Kam Dovedi, property investment expert, mentor and founder of Premier Property. Let's get on with the questioning. Andy, you're in the spotlight first, so would it be against the law to have a property owned in a limited company and then rent it to yourself for a minimal figure? How would taxation work, assuming it was allowed?
The programme is obviously property question time, but I think there's an expectation that I'm the one providing answers. But I think my immediate reaction to that question would be to pose a very simple question in return, and that really would be why. Why would you want to do this? But I'll set that aside, to one side for a moment, and I'll assume that it's a scenario which has come around by accident. So let's say the individual was letting the property via a company to a third party, and for whatever reason it's vacant, and they've decided that they would like to live in the property themselves. I think the first point is it's not illegal. So he or she can occupy the property without having their collar felt. I think so. So that's certainly the good news. They can sleep easy on that. I think the tax position is a bit more of a horror show, to be honest. Holding a property through a company and living in it is and I think the question was that they were going to pay a minimal rent. So let's say you're paying a peppercorn rent at best. It's not going to be good from a tax point of view. First and foremost, you've got a potential benefit in kind charge there if you're the director of a company and it provides you with cheap accommodation. Then there's going to be a tax liability there, and that's broadly going to be calculated, if I can remember any of my sort of tax studies, because it's probably the last time I looked at a calculation like this, but it's the cost of the property, and you get a fairly arbitrary deduction of 75,000, and then the result is taxed at HMRC's official rate of interest, which at the moment is 2.25%. So there's a tax charge on that amount. The second tax point, which looms its rather ugly head, is something called the annual tax on envelope dwellings, the dreaded or hated ATED, which, as the name suggests, and no prizes for guessing this, it's an annual tax on a dwelling which is held within a company, and that applies where the property is worth more than £500,000. So clearly, it's going to apply to most sort of properties in the southeast. One would think, and it's essentially a progressive annual charge depending on the value of the property. So if our viewers' property is in the band of 500,000 to 1 million, the annual levy is 3,700. If the property is worth a bit more, so say £20 million plus, then that annual levy can be as much as £236,000 per annum. So there are various sort of thresholds within the legislation. And just coming back to the original point, I've kind of assumed there that the company already owns the property, and let's say that the tenant has moved out and our viewer has moved in. That's really the only scenario I can see this occurring. If for whatever reason we're looking at setting up this kind of arrangement from scratch, I mean, first and foremost, I wouldn't advise on it at all, because we've got those points that I've mentioned above. But also acquiring a property through a company tends not to be a very good idea from a stamp duty land tax point of view either. And yeah, the SDLT system is, in my view, fairly grotesque, and I probably will stop talking about it. Otherwise, I might start frothing at the mouth.
Well, Andy, thank you for that. But I think, you know, a lot of this confusion comes from, we see a lot, if you go on the internet blogs, that sort of thing about property, mainly to do with buy-to-let. We've gone through a period where everybody was saying, oh, you must always put it in a ring fence, limited company, da 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 da. Then we had the taxation changes, I think probably, was it 18 months, 2 years ago now, where it's not particularly attractive to put it in a limited company. People are saying, no, it's probably better in your own name. Very, very difficult advice to follow if you're a novice, if you're a new owner or whatever else. And it's very easy on the internet to see advice and not really understand at what date that advice was given. So, yeah. I think we can forgive people for being a bit confused about this, but I think I tend to agree with you. You know, if you keep it simple, you don't go far wrong, do you?
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. I think my view of tax planning, tax structuring, whatever you want to call it, keep it as simple as possible. Yeah, in terms of executing your objectives, and it's always important. I always say this, that your circumstances and your objectives should lead any structuring. Yeah, don't say this too loudly, but tax isn't the most important thing in the world. It's your personal and your commercial objectives. The tax should slot in afterwards. So don't let tax drive the transaction. It is. I mean, tax is important, because once you've decided what you're going to do, then clearly, if you do it one way and you pay 50% tax, and you do it another way and pay 10% tax, clearly you're going to go down the second route. But these should be things which follow on from your objectives rather than driving your objectives.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Cam, just quickly before we go to your question, anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, I can only give you the entrepreneur's approach, because I can't give any tax advice. But as an entrepreneur in property, one of the brilliant things about property itself is that there are two things that are working with this vehicle really well. And that is, tax is a massive advantage, because, and I'm going to say a shocking statement, and that is, tax is actually a choice when it comes to property. And by the way, that's according to HMRC's guidelines. You've got to be always, of course, on the right side of HMRC, and we've got to do it correctly. However, it's quite sad, because not a lot of people really understand how they can use tax as an advantage. And the second thing is how they can use leverage, financing, as an advantage for property. A savvy property investor really mitigates the taxation. So that's how we do it. Now, having said that, I come from a poor background. My mum used to be a machinist, working 7 days a week, typically 10 to 12 hours every single day. And it wasn't like that for her. So, she'd get her pay slip, a little brown paper envelope at that time, and they'd strip out the tax, they'd strip out the national insurance, and whatever was left, they'd actually throw it at her. And that's why I actually like using the HMRC guidelines and the tax advantage that we got, because tax is really a choice. And it is quite sad to see people that don't really understand how they can use it as a massive advantage. Specific example, this Section 24, or as we all know, the landlord tax. Yep. Many people are kind of concerned and worried, and really sort of stuck in a corner really with that. However, if they only knew, that is the best thing ever that could have happened to us when you use it as a proper system according to HMRC's guidelines, to actually use it as an advantage. Haven't got time to go into that, but just to summarize, so listeners here, just to add some value for them, if you look at BIM, B Bravo IM 46900, you'll see what I mean. Okay, well, Cam, thank you very much for that. And we'll move now on to your question. Could I ask the panel if they could suggest a formula for assessing the overall yield from a buy-to-let property in terms of geography? It would seem that the yields are higher the further north you go. However,
I guess one has to ask if the demand and affordability are lesser than in the south. I don't know whether that should be lesser or greater really, but anyway. Would appreciate some guidance. So I think what they're really saying there, look, the yields seem higher in the north, but the properties are cheaper. The percentage yields are higher, but does it really work that way?
That's a great question, actually, there, Stephen. In my experience, there are actually 4 areas that, in my experience, that we have across the country. We're London-based. However, each area sometimes actually feels like a different country. The demographics, the people, the whole thing is so completely different in these areas. So answering your question directly, in London, in London and different areas, you can actually create parameters for this. So in the north, for example, in my experience, what we look for is 7% plus yields. 7% plus yields. And in London, we look for 5.5% plus yields. Now, if we compare this to professional data like Ninth Rank Research, the yields that they're looking at is anywhere between 3.5% to 4.2%. So, of course, I've just mentioned 5.5% to 7% plus. And to be fair, we get much higher than that. So, you can, as an investor, really learn how to get these really good yields. Now, in the northern areas, now never say that to a northerner, of course, I'm sure there's some northerners watching this. North of Watford is what we're talking about. Good people, straight talking people, in my experience.
Now don't start calling me London centric. I've got 1 or 2 of our panelists that do that. But anyway, carry on.
Yeah. So in the north of Watford, what we'll find is yes, I mean there's going to be more income, however less growth. But in my experience, what we've been finding over the last 4 years is that there is a lot of, let's call it London money, going into these areas. Because let's be honest, no one's a fool. They understand the stress test that the finances are bringing in. So, investors understand that the north of Watford is now a great opportunity for property. And I believe that's what's actually driving the prices up there. That's what we're finding and doing on a daily basis. In London, it's different strategies. So we have different property strategies. The yield might be lower. However, what we're looking for is the capital gain. So it's the cash uplift. So although we've got a slightly lower yield, even though it's even more than Ninth Rank researchers saying that we should be getting, so we're getting well above that, we're also adding in capital gain, so it mitigates the income side of things over a period of time.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Well, I have to say that just before we go to break, I'll tell you this. I have a friend that says if you can't see the telecom tower, don't do it. But anyway, there we are. Thank you. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show. Join me again after the break. Hello, and welcome back to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Andy Wood and Kam Dovedi.
Hi.
Welcome back, guys. Okay, so Andy, your second question is, I'm considering buying my first property and wonder if I will lose my lifetime ISA 25% allowance if I buy the property in a limited company rather than my personal name. I'm told that there are benefits to buying in a company name. Do the panel agree?
So I think there are probably 2 questions there, aren't there? So perhaps we can break that down into 2. So the lifetime ISA question, the LISA question, and the benefits of buying through a company. I mean, you mentioned the 25% allowance. I think it's described as a 25% bonus that you can get on contributions into a lifetime ISA, and I think it's capped at about £1,000. The bonus that you can receive. I mean, and I suppose the question just slightly rephrases whether you can purchase a property through the LISA without losing that 25% bonus. I think the answer or the broad answer is yes, but there are some strict criteria. The first is that the property needs to be less than £450,000 in value, and more problematic for the the viewer or the person posing the question is that first of all, it needs to be your first property or interest in a property in the UK, and also you need to live in it. So that's probably where the cunning plan is going to break down, because it sounds to me from the question that they were purchasing it as a buy to let property. If they were, then they can't buy it through the leaser without losing the bonus. And secondly, I don't think it's possible to purchase a property through a company using this route anyway, but I certainly wouldn't buy it for the reasons mentioned in the first part of this show. I wouldn't recommend buying a property through a company and living in it anyway. It's from a tax point of view, could be a very costly idea.
Okay, if you were able to show revenue that you were the sole shareholder, sole director of the company, it was a specific vehicle for this purpose, would that make any difference?
No, I don't think it would be, just because it wouldn't satisfy the second and third condition I mentioned, I don't think.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Anything to add to that, Kam?
I would say it's a great question. However, it's also about thinking outside the box. So my daughter's actually done this. So she just bought up her first property in a company. And the thing is, she's bought an investment property. Why has she done that? Well, if you think about it, as an entrepreneur's perspective, how about creating wealth through property, which you can then repurpose and then, potentially buy your own place with that. There's so many people that are, really looking forward to getting on the property ladder, yet it can take them years and years to build up that deposit. If you look at this ISA, it can take so long. But if you think outside the box, you can use property as a vehicle, as an asset, to really accelerate what you're doing. So you can add value, you can create income, and using refinancing techniques, things that, of course, we can share in more time. There's so much to share. All of that, that allows you to use that money, which is like what my daughter is doing, which she can then repurpose and buy other properties, which then build a nice, faster nest egg to then buy your own residential. Just another way.
Kam, a lot of kids won't be able to access the sort of advice you're able to give to your daughter. I always think it's very important. There's so much crossover when people talk about buying property, whether it's, they talk about investment and growth and all the rest of it. I don't think anybody should ever lose sight of the fact that if you're buying it for your home, they are the considerations that you should really take into account. And the investment angle and the property price growth through inflation are really quite secondary. Very much in the same way that Andy said in part one of the programme, don't let tax or aspiration drive your purchase. Be very clear about why you're buying it and what for, I think.
Yeah, it's a human fundamental need. We need to live somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's a great vehicle to actually create a business, really, because that's what it is. It's also a business. But yeah, you need a roof over your head. And it's a great business to be in, because you're providing roofs for people's heads as well. Okay,
good. Right, your second question then. In readiness for my entry into the buy-to-let investment market, I found many online tutorial opportunities offering a fast and easy path to property profits. Some of these mentoring offers are quite expensive, so my question is, how do I check out the providers, their courses, and ensure that they're genuine and realistic in terms of content? I think we've all seen these adverts, haven't we? Make $1 million on property in 6 easy steps.
The truth is, it's not easy. I've been in this last 30 years. I fell into it at the age of 18. I won't go into the whole story of things. There was no silver spoon. But, fast track 30 years later, what we have done is there are systems that we created, processes that we use on a daily basis, which allow people to fast track their journey. So you can do it faster with a system. However, you've got to learn the system. And we do trainings. The trainings that we do, and I've been on the other side of the trainings as well, because I've spent a lot of money on trainings and mentorships as well. And what we do is we only share what we are actively doing now. So the way I can keep this honest is I will only share with you the strategies in London, outside London, in the north, and so on. Whatever we're doing right now is what I'll only share. So I think that's one thing that people should look for. They should look for some proof. Second thing is you also want to find wealthy people who can actually give you the time, because let's be honest, wealthy people don't need to train people. Yeah? They're doing it for different reasons. So if you're like me, the reason I do it, if you're wondering, is because yes, the financial freedom part is done, but what do you do for the rest of your life? Okay, you enjoy holidays and all the rest of it, but if you lead a humble life and you're enjoying it, what do? You go and park yourself in a corner? It doesn't work like that. And the way I'm built is I love to share. I don't like to keep things to myself. I like to share so that people can do the same thing I've done for my family. They can do it for themselves. They can do it for their loved ones. It shouldn't be bottled up and kept somewhere. It should be shared, is my view. That's why we do it.
How do you test that when you're looking at an internet advert?
You can't. You've got to take a chance. So usually it's a first step. And how you check that is, as I've mentioned, first is look for proof. Also look for your gut feel. Your gut feel is always right in my perspective. And with those two, you can have a step-by-step approach on getting to know that person or that company or whoever it is you want to deal with. And once the curtain falls away, you actually see that it's all very genuine and very real. Because let's be honest, property out there can be quite sharky. There's a lot of sharky people out there as well. But if you can find the right people that you find a match with, then it's a completely different. It's a game changer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that, Andy?
I mean, obviously, I don't really have much to say about choosing the right sort of property mentor or anything like that. So I think, and I think it does touch upon it a little bit. But my view is, I'm often surprised by how many people in the property game will take tax advice from websites, from people who, with all due respect, are property people rather than tax people. And I think if anybody with any understanding of the UK tax system would run a mile, I think, rather than dabbling in tax. And I think to go back to the question that we pondered earlier about whether you should hold a property through a company or through some other structure. When we used to be allowed to go along to sort of conference events, you could go and see, there'd usually be a couple of tax speakers there, and the first one would be saying that owning a property through a company would be the best thing since sliced bread, and then they would be immediately replaced by somebody who would say that incorporation was essentially the devil's work. And really all that it reinforces what I said at the beginning. Any tax project needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. And there is no one solution. There is no sort of cut out and keep guide to structuring a property investment or property development or some other project. And it's just a case that I think that you need to get advice. And my view would be, just going back to the question, that if you're using a mentor or you're appointing any advisors, make sure that you're using specialists in particular areas. That would be sort of my two penneth on that question.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I think it's just one very quick thing on your comments about limited companies. I mean, people, especially if it's a one-off exercise, they shouldn't forget that, they're going to be faced with audit fees of probably £2,000 or £3,000 a year for a very simple limited company even. And of course, there's quite a cost if you decide that vehicle's no further use to you and you want to wind it down. That again, these days can be quite expensive, can't it?
My view is that the company comes into its own where you're running a proper, and I use that in inverted commas, or a substantial business, and whether that's property or it's some other trading, potentially trading activity, because really all a company does is it acts as a valve. So you pay profits at the corporate level at the moment. corporation tax is 19%. And then if you're reinvesting sums back into the business, it's tax efficient because you're doing it at a net of 19% rather than if you're doing it in your own name or through a partnership. But through your own name is going back to the points earlier, is the simplest way of doing it. Then you're going to be paying personal tax potentially at 40 or 45%, and therefore you can reinvest less into the business. Now, if you're doing something on a relatively small scale, where and perhaps you are using the income to live off and have fun, then I think you're absolutely right, Stephen. I think the administration headache and costs can be problematic for people. I mean, I'm a bit of an admin phobe myself, and the various sort of, and I use an accountant, and the various sort of chases that I get from them for all kinds of paperwork at a company's house. It's not why I get out of bed in the morning. I imagine that most property entrepreneurs, it's certainly not why they get out of bed in the morning, is to fill in forms with company's house. So it is a point, it is a valid point.
Okay, Andy, thank you. Well, look, that's all we've got time for in today's show. So I'm going to say a big thank you for joining us on Zoom to Andy Wood, founder of ETC Tax. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Stephen.
And again, a big thank you. Cam, your first time on Property Question Time, so I hope you've enjoyed it. I thank you for your contribution to the show, very helpful. So thank you to Kam Dovedi.
Thank you, Stephen, for having me.
And we'll see you next time on Property Question Time.